Far away in time, more than 20,000 years ago, the northern hemisphere is locked in cold. Ice sheets stretch across continents, covering much of North America and northern Europe. Glaciers grind against the land, scraping valleys and burying rivers under walls of frozen mass. The world's oceans are lower, held captive in ice, and coastlines stretch outward into plains that no longer exist today. What appears now as sea was once exposed earth, a place where people and animals roamed. This frozen world sets the stage for one of humanity's most remarkable journeys, the first crossing into the Americas. The Earth during this time is in the grip of the last glacial maximum. Temperatures are lower than today by many degrees. Winds sweep across barren tundras. Steppe grasslands spread from Central Europe to Siberia. Herds of mammoths, bison, and reindeer wander the open plains while carnivores stalk in their shadow. It is a land both rich and harsh, where survival depends on movement and adaptability. Humans, already spread widely across Eurasia, carve out their living in these cold frontiers. At the far northeastern edge of Asia lies a frontier where land and ocean meet in frozen balance. Here, Siberia narrows into a peninsula pointing toward another continent. Across what is now the Bering Strait, Alaska sits silent, glaciated, and untouched by humans. Between them lies not water, but land. Lower sea levels have revealed a vast bridge of earth, Beringia. This is not a narrow passage but an entire region, 1,000 kilometers wide in places, linking two worlds. Steppe, shrub, and tundra cover its expanse, offering pasture for animals and possibility for humans. The presence of Beringia is one of Earth's hidden gifts. It forms only when ice ages pull the seas back. In warmer times, it lies beneath the waves, unseen. But in this frozen epoch, it opens a path that may carry people farther than they have ever gone. Archaeologists and geneticists today agree that the ancestors of Native Americans passed this way, though the exact routes and timing remain a matter of debate. Before crossing fully into the Americas, these ancient people had to endure the climate of Siberia. Life on the eastern steppe demanded skill. Winters stretched long and bitter. Summers were short but filled with swarms of insects. People hunted reindeer and bison, fished rivers, and gathered berries when they ripened. Fires kept the cold at bay. Stone tools shaped hides into clothing, and shelters of wood and bone shielded families from storms. The knowledge of how to survive such extremes built over generations, passed from one band to the next. Without it, the Great Crossing would never have been possible. Archaeological sites in Siberia reveal traces of this life. Charred hearths, chipped stone blades, and carved bone needles lie buried in permafrost. Some camps are positioned along rivers, suggesting that fish provided essential food when game grew scarce. Others are found on higher ground, perhaps chosen for visibility to watch migrating herds. One remarkable discovery is a set of mammoth bone dwellings, circles of tusks and skulls stacked to form windbreaks, dating back more than 15,000 years. These fragments speak softly, yet together they tell of communities prepared to face the cold. But knowledge alone was not enough. The planet itself determined when and where migration could unfold. Massive ice sheets blocked much of the northern passages. In North America, the Laurentide and Cordilleran glaciers sealed the interior in walls of ice more than a kilometer high. For many millennia, they acted as an impenetrable barrier. Even if humans reached Beringia, the door to the southern continents remained closed. The Great Migration was not a single crossing, but a long pause on the threshold of a new world. This pause created a mystery that scientists still study. How long did people live on Beringia before moving farther? Genetic evidence suggests that an isolated population remained there for thousands of years, perhaps 15,000 or more. This Beringian standstill hypothesis proposes that early migrants survived in this vast land, cut off from both Asia and the Americas, waiting for ice to retreat. If true, their descendants carried this long pause within their DNA, a hidden memory of endurance on a vanished plain. The scale of Beringia was immense. At its height, it stretched farther than the distance from London to Moscow. Herds of woolly mammoth and steppe bison roamed freely, creating an ecosystem that humans could follow and hunt. Rivers braided across the plain, emptying into shallow seas. Lakes dotted the tundra. From the perspective of those who lived there, this was not a mere bridge, but a homeland in itself. Entire generations could have lived and died without ever knowing that the land beneath their feet would one day disappear. Planetary forces shaped their fate. As glaciers locked water into ice, the oceans fell more than 100 meters below today's levels. Coastlines stretched outward, revealing continental shelves. Across the world, land that is now drowned, Sunderland in Southeast Asia, Doggerland in northern Europe, and Beringia in the north, served as stage for human journeys. Each was temporary, destined to sink again as the climate warmed. The people of Beringia may not have known why the seas were far away, but they lived in the narrow window when the Earth's balance made crossing possible. Among the lesser-known details of this era are the tiny artifacts left behind, fragile yet enduring. Beads carved from shells have been discovered far from any coast, carried inland by human hands. A single tooth of a child, found in Siberia, carries the genetic legacy of a group now known only through DNA, the Denisovans, distant cousins of modern humans. Such finds remind us that the story of migration was complex, with different human groups interwoven. The ancestors of Native Americans carried with them not only tools and skills, but also genetic echoes of encounters with other lineages. Mysteries still surround this beginning. Some scholars argue that humans may have entered the Americas earlier than the classic timeline suggests. Sites such as Monteverde in Chile, dated to over 14,000 years ago, challenge the idea of a late entry. More controversial claims suggest even deeper antiquity, though these remain debated. The evidence is incomplete, scattered, and often hidden beneath ice or sea. What is certain is that by the end of the Ice Age, humans stood on both sides of the Pacific, having made the greatest step eastward in human prehistory. The frozen world of this first section is both forbidding and full of potential. Against the backdrop of shifting ice and falling seas, humans prepared unknowingly for a crossing that would reshape continents. The glaciers may have seemed eternal, but slowly, imperceptibly, they began to weaken. Warmth would return, paths would open, and the people waiting on Beringia's plains would step forward into a land no one had ever seen before. On the far eastern steppe of Ice Age Eurasia, the climate is relentless. Winter lingers for most of the year. Winds cut across open plains, sweeping snow into ridges. Summer is brief, a few months of light and growth, before the cold returns again. Yet here, humans endure. They adapt their lives to the rhythm of the seasons, making use of every resource the land offers. These people live in small bands, often no more than a few dozen individuals. Their shelters are simple, frames of wood or bone, covered with hides, sometimes dug partially into the ground for insulation. Inside, hearths burn with gathered wood, driftwood, or bones of animals, for timber is scarce in these treeless plains. Fire is constant, its warmth essential to life. Around it, families work hides, sharpen tools, and prepare food. Tools are the key to survival. Stone blades, carefully flaked, are hafted into spears and knives. Bones are shaped into awls and needles. With these, hides are sewn into tailored clothing, long parkas, leggings, and boots that guard against the cold. Without such clothing, survival here would be impossible. Archaeologists have found delicate bone needles in Siberia, some pierced with eyes finer than a modern pin, evidence of skilled sewing tens of thousands of years ago. The land provides both challenge and sustenance. Herds of reindeer migrate across the plains, their paths predictable with the seasons. Hunters wait along river crossings or narrow valleys, spears ready. Bison, musk ox, and mammoths also roam here, offering meat, hides, and bone. Smaller animals, hares, foxes, birds, add variety to the diet. Rivers and lakes supply fish, netted or speared, and in short summers, berries and roots are gathered. Nothing is wasted.
Even sinew becomes cord, and marrow becomes food.
The scale of Siberia is immense. From the Baikal Basin to the Chukchi Peninsula is thousands of kilometers, farther than many nations today. Yet over generations, people move across it. They follow rivers north and east. They track herds across tundra. Each movement is small in a lifetime, but together they create a steady expansion toward the edge of Asia. Archaeological sites map this progress. Near Lake Baikal, camps show reliance on fish as well as game. In the Alden River Basin, stone tools mark early presence around 20,000 years ago. Farther north, at Yana on the Arctic Circle, ivory points, beads, and ornaments reveal human life 30,000 years ago in extreme latitudes once thought uninhabitable. Such finds testify to human adaptability. Long before crossing into the Americas, people were already thriving in the north. Amid these traces are objects of beauty, beads carved from ivory, pendants of pierced animal teeth, figurines of mammoth and bird shapes, all found in camps across Siberia. Even in a harsh world, people created symbols, ornament, ritual, and meaning traveled alongside survival. A shell bead found more than 100 kilometers from the sea suggests trade or long journeys, a connection between distant places. These artifacts remind us that migration carried culture as well as bodies. Genetic studies add another perspective. Ancient DNA from Siberia reveals that the ancestors of Native Americans descend from a blend of populations. One lineage, the ancient North Siberians, lived near Lake Baikal around 24,000 years ago. Later, they mixed with groups related to East Asians. The result was a unique ancestry, isolated on the northeastern steppe, that would one day cross into the Americas. This mixture shows that movement across Siberia was not a single stream but a braided river of peoples. The mystery is how humans endured the cold at such latitudes. Did they build semi-subterranean houses? Did they line boots with fur and moss? Archaeological evidence suggests yes, but details are incomplete. Mammoth bone circles hint at large shelters, perhaps covered with hides. Yet only fragments survive, leaving researchers to imagine the full design. The resilience required is clear, even if the exact methods remain hidden. Planetary forces shaped everything. The last glacial maximum cooled the atmosphere, drove winds across open plains, and lowered rainfall. Grasslands spread, supporting herds, while glaciers farther north pushed the climate into extremes. Dust from ice sheets settled on the land, forming fertile loess, but also veiling horizons in haze. The eastern steppe was not only a human challenge, but part of a planetary system of ice, wind, and grass that stretched thousands of kilometers. Rivers cut through this system, offering life. The Lena, Aldan, and Kolyma carried fish and waterfowl, wood for fire, and roots for movement. In summer, they supported dense life. In winter, frozen rivers served as paths across the land. Archaeological sites cluster along these valleys, where resources concentrated. It is likely along such waterways that humans made their slow but steady march toward Beringia. Perhaps dogs were already part of this journey. Remains in Siberia more than 15,000 years old suggest early domestication. If present, dogs would have aided hunts, carried loads, and guarded camps. A partnership forged in the cold may have been decisive. Yet this too is debated, for evidence is fragmentary. Whether with or without dogs, humans carried their knowledge of animals, fire, and mobility into the far northeast. The distances are vast. From central Siberia to the edge of Asia is comparable to walking from Madrid across Europe to beyond Moscow, and still farther. Yet migration did not mean single journeys. Families moved seasonally. Children grew and learned. Elders shared knowledge. Over centuries, this became expansion. Slowly, humans gathered on the edge of Asia, their backs to the steppe, their faces toward the land that would one day be called the Americas. The great unanswered question is whether this spread was constant or broken. Did groups move eastward in steady waves, or did they retreat southward during colder centuries, returning when conditions improved? The archaeological record is too thin to decide. What is certain is that by 20,000 years ago, people stood in the northeastern frontier of Asia. From there, the next step would lead them into a land untouched by humans. The eastern steppe, cold and open, was their proving ground. Here, they perfected the art of survival in marginal lands. They carried practical tools, symbolic ornaments, and cultural memory. They endured a world where ice, grass, and wind dictated life. As they gathered at the threshold of Beringia, the training of countless generations prepared them for what lay ahead, a crossing into an unknown world. Between the continents of Asia and North America, a hidden land once stretched far and wide. Today, the Bering Strait separates Siberia from Alaska with waters less than 100 kilometers across. But during the height of the Ice Age, the seas were lower, locked into glaciers, and the seabed lay exposed. What appears now as ocean was then a vast plain of earth, a place of rivers, lakes, grasslands, and tundra. This was Beringia, the gateway between worlds. Beringia was not a narrow corridor. At its widest, it spanned more than 1,000 kilometers from north to south. From the Chukchi Peninsula in Siberia to the Yukon in Alaska, it formed a landscape larger than many modern countries. Winds swept across open steppe. Grasses and sedges grew in patches, supporting herds of grazing animals. In sheltered areas, dwarf willows and birch spread low across the ground. The climate was cold, but not as harsh as the glaciers farther south. It was a place where life could take hold. For humans moving eastward across Siberia, Beringia was not just a bridge but a homeland. Here they found caribou, bison, and woolly mammoth. Musk ox wandered the plains, and smaller animals, hares, foxes, and birds, added variety to the diet. Rivers teemed with fish, while the coasts provided seals and seabirds. Archaeological traces suggest that people could have lived here for thousands of years, sustained by the rich, if seasonal, resources. The idea of Beringia as a homeland is known as the Beringian standstill. Genetic studies of indigenous peoples in the Americas reveal a signature suggesting that their ancestors lived in isolation for a long period before spreading south. Archaeologists interpret this as a pause, perhaps 15,000 years or more, when human groups settled in Beringia, cut off by glaciers from moving farther. Here they waited, not intentionally, but simply surviving until the world changed. One lesser-known detail of this land is the presence of steppe vegetation known as the mammoth steppe. This ecosystem, stretching across Eurasia and North America, was one of the richest grassland biomes of the Ice Age. Despite the cold, its grasses supported dense herds of animals. For humans, this meant consistent hunting opportunities. Beringia was not barren. It was, in its way, abundant. Yet mysteries remain. Archaeologists still debate whether people first crossed Beringia before, during, or after the last glacial maximum. Some evidence suggests humans were present in the Americas earlier than once thought, perhaps before 20,000 years ago. If so, then Beringia was crossed not once, but multiple times. But the land itself now lies underwater, making direct evidence hard to recover. Much of the story is hidden beneath the sea. Planetary forces shaped every detail. With ice sheets holding water, sea levels fell more than 100 meters. Continental shelves worldwide became dry land. Beringia was one of the largest of these exposed regions, rivaling Sunderland in Southeast Asia. When the climate warmed and glaciers melted, the seas rose again, drowning the land bridge. What had been homeland and passage became sea floor. The Bering Strait reopened, a boundary once more. For those who lived in Beringia, daily life was a balance of movement and settlement. Camps clustered near rivers, where fish could be caught and animals came to drink. In summer, berries and roots provided supplements. In winter, shelters of bone and hide gave protection. Hunters may have used boats or rafts along coastal inlets, though no direct evidence survives. Stone tools chipped from local sources have been found on both sides of the modern strait, suggesting movement back and forth across the plain. The scale of Beringia was immense. From east to west, its expanse equaled the distance between Paris and Warsaw, multiplied several times. For those who lived there, it was not simply a crossing, but a world unto itself. Generations were born and died without leaving its borders. To them, there may have been no sense of standing on a threshold between continents. They lived in a land as real and enduring as any other. Only much later would their descendants realize that it was temporary. Among the most intriguing finds from the region are ancient tools uncovered along the Yukon River basin. These stone blades, dating to more than 14,000 years ago, carry signatures of craftsmanship linked to Siberian traditions. They suggest continuity of culture across Beringia. Such evidence strengthens the idea that humans did not simply rush across, but lived there long enough to develop traditions adapted to local resources. Another mystery lies in the role of the coast. Some scientists propose that humans followed a kelp highway, traveling along shorelines rich in marine life. In this view, people in Beringia may have used small boats to exploit seals, fish, and shellfish, moving gradually along the Pacific Rim. If true, much of the evidence now lies beneath coastal waters, hidden by rising seas. Archaeologists search submerged landscapes for clues, but the ocean guards its secrets tightly. Planetary scale is seen again in the animals. Beringia was home not only to mammoths and bison, but also to predators, cave lions, wolves, and possibly short-faced bears. Humans lived within this web of life. Hunters, yet also hunted. Fire was their ally. At night, flames kept predators at bay, and in the long Arctic winters, firelight was the center of warmth and survival. Charcoal fragments found in permafrost soils attest to ancient hearths, burning brightly in a dark world. As the Ice Age waned, change loomed. Temperatures began to rise, glaciers started to retreat, and new paths would open. But for millennia, Beringia was a stable refuge, a world where humans paused. They did not know they were on the edge of two continents. They knew only that they lived on a plain of grass and ice, sustained by herds and rivers. In time, this land would vanish, but its role as gateway and home would endure in the genetic memory of all who crossed. Life on Beringia is steady, though always fragile. The land bridge, exposed by lowered seas, it is no barren desert. It is a broad plain of grass, sedge, and scrub, cut by winding rivers and dotted with lakes. To the north lies the frozen Arctic Ocean. To the south, glaciers wall off the interior of North America. Between them stretches a land rich in resources. For millennia, human communities live here, finding ways to endure in a world of cold winds and endless horizons. Archaeological and genetic evidence suggests that people may have remained in Beringia for thousands of years, isolated from both Asia and the Americas. This period, known as the Beringian Standstill, is one of the most intriguing chapters in human prehistory. During this standstill, populations adapted to a landscape that was both a corridor and a homeland. They hunted the great animals of the mammoth steppe, fished rivers, gathered plants in the short summers, and endured long winters of scarcity. Hunting defined much of their life. Reindeer and caribou herds passed through, providing meat, hides, and sinew. Steppe bison grazed the open grasslands. Mammoths moved in slow herds across the plains, dangerous but valuable for their massive tusks, bones, and meat. Smaller animals, such as hares and foxes, were caught in traps. Birds nested in wetlands during summer, and their eggs became another seasonal food. To survive here, humans needed to follow the rhythms of migration, knowing when herds would return and when rivers would freeze. The mammoth bone dwellings of Eastern Europe find echoes here. Circles of tusks and bones, stacked together, may have served as foundations for shelters covered with hides. Archaeologists imagine these structures shielding families from the wind, with central hearths providing warmth and light. Around such fires, tools were repaired, skins scraped clean, and sinew twisted into cord. The fragments left behind, flakes of stone, bits of charcoal, pierced beads, are small, but they speak of lives lived over generations. Lesser-known details enrich the picture. In some sites, beads made from fossil ivory or shells appear, items likely traded across long distances. Their presence suggests networks of exchange, even in this remote land. Families may have met others during seasonal hunts, exchanging not only materials but also stories and knowledge. Such interactions bound groups together across the steppe, ensuring survival in difficult times. The mystery remains of how many people lived on Beringia. Estimates vary, but the land was vast enough to support thousands, perhaps tens of thousands, scattered in small groups. Genetic evidence indicates that a relatively small population gave rise to the ancestors of all indigenous peoples in the Americas. This bottleneck suggests that during the long standstill, numbers may have been limited, vulnerable to fluctuations in climate and resources. Yet they endured long enough to continue the journey when conditions changed. Planetary forces defined their boundaries. To the south, the Laurentide and Cordilleran ice sheets blocked any passage into the heart of North America. Walls of ice, a kilometer thick, stretched from mountains to sea, sealing the continent. To the west, glaciers and tundra limited routes back into Asia. Beringia was both refuge and prison, a place where people survived but could not yet move farther. Only when the planet warmed and ice retreated would the path open. Daily life required resilience. In summer, people likely moved to River Valley, where fish could be caught in abundance. Nets woven from sinew or plant fibers, though rarely preserved, may have been used. In winter, they relied more heavily on meat stored from hunts and on fat-rich marrow cracked from bones. Fires burned constantly, fueled by driftwood or even dried dung. Clothing, carefully sewn from hides, protected against frostbite. Needles carved from bone reveal remarkable craftsmanship, with eyes fine enough to pass sinew thread. The landscape itself was striking. Broad plains stretched farther than the eye could see. In spring, flowers bloomed briefly, adding color to the tundra. In autumn, the ground turned golden before fading into winter's white. Lakes mirrored the sky, and rivers carved paths toward the sea. Herds moved across this expanse, and humans followed, their lives entwined with the animals. This was a world both austere and sustaining, its balance delicate yet enduring for millennia. Another lesser-known detail lies in the diet. Analyses of ancient hearths suggest not only large game hunting, but also small-scale use of plants. Seeds, roots, and berries added vitamins crucial for survival. While meat provided calories, these plants offered balance. In such marginal environments, even small amounts of gathered food could be the difference between health and illness. The inclusion of diverse resources reveals ingenuity in exploiting everything available. Mysteries still surround Beringia's cultural life. Did these communities develop distinct traditions, unique languages, or myths tied to the land? With no written records, the answers remain hidden. Archaeologists infer from artifacts that symbolic life flourished. Beads, carvings, and ornaments imply meaning beyond function. Genetic evidence shows that these groups remained isolated long enough to develop distinct lineages. Yet the stories they told, the songs they may have sung, are lost. Planetary scale becomes visible in the shifting coastlines. When seas were lowest, Beringia extended far north and south, covering an area larger than modern France and Germany combined. Rivers meandered across plains that are now submerged. As the climate warmed, coastlines crept inward. Camps once on dry land vanished beneath the sea. Today, much of the earliest evidence of life in Beringia lies underwater, out of reach. Still, what survives on land is enough to confirm the long human presence. Stone tools chipped from local chert, scrapers used to prepare hides, spear points flaked with skill. These mark the presence of hunters and gatherers who called this land home. Charcoal layers in permafrost soils indicate repeated fires, long after the hearths themselves collapsed. Together, these traces form a quiet testimony to human persistence. The standstill on Beringia may have lasted thousands of years, a span longer than all of recorded history since the invention of writing. To those who lived there, it was not waiting. It was life, complete in itself. Camps rose and fell. Children were born, grew, and were buried. Generations succeeded one another in a world that seemed permanent. Only in hindsight does it appear as a pause before the Great Crossing. When ice finally began to retreat, paths opened. Some groups moved south through interior corridors. Others may have followed the Pacific coast, exploiting marine resources. But before those journeys, there was Beringia, vast, cold, and sustaining. It was both a home and a threshold, a land that shaped the people who would one day spread across the Americas. South of Beringia, the way into the Americas is blocked. Two immense sheets of ice dominate the continent. The Laurentide, spreading east of the Rocky Mountains, covers nearly all of present-day Canada. The Cordilleran, smaller but still massive, presses down along the Pacific ranges. Between them lies a frozen wall. At their maximum, the two glaciers meet, sealing off the land to the south. For humans who have reached Beringia, the Americas are tantalizingly close, yet inaccessible. The Laurentide ice sheet is one of the largest glacial bodies Earth has ever known. At its height, it stretches from the Atlantic coast to the Central Plains, and from the Arctic down into what is now the northern United States. Its thickness exceeds 2 kilometers in places. Mountains are buried beneath its weight. Rivers are blocked, their courses diverted. The Cordilleran, though smaller, is no less formidable. Together, they form a continuous front of ice that endures for thousands of years. For those living in Beringia, this means confinement. To the north lies the Arctic Ocean, to the west, Asia, and to the east, seas that will one day return. To the south, the ice. The only choice is to remain. Here lies the essence of the Beringian standstill. People live on the land bridge, generation after generation, unable to move farther. Their survival depends on resources at hand and on careful adaptation to a land that is both refuge and prison. Archaeologists see this long pause in the genetic record. Studies of indigenous American DNA show evidence of a bottleneck, ancestry, that traces back to a relatively small population isolated for millennia. This suggests that humans did not sweep rapidly into the Americas, but instead spent thousands of years in Beringia before spreading south. The exact length of this standstill remains debated, but the reality of the glacial barrier is beyond doubt. One lesser-known detail of this icy confinement is the shifting presence of ice-free refugia, even at maximum glaciation. Pockets of unglaciated land remained, particularly along the southern coast of Alaska and parts of the Yukon. These areas may have supported plants and animals, providing limited resources. Some scientists argue that humans may have used these refuges as stepping stones, but the evidence is sparse. Most likely, the main mass of ice remained impassable until the climate warmed. The scale of these glaciers is planetary. Their sheer weight depresses the land beneath, pressing the Earth's crust downward. Their white surfaces reflect sunlight, cooling the atmosphere further and reinforcing the ice age. As they grow, sea levels fall even more, exposing continental shelves across the world. As they retreat, seas rise, flooding coasts. The fate of people in Beringia is tied to this vast cycle of ice and water, a rhythm far beyond human lifetimes. Daily life continues in spite of the barrier. Camps remain near rivers where fish migrate in summer. Hunters track reindeer, caribou, and bison. Mammoths provide both food and material for shelter. Driftwood and bones fuel fires. Clothing stitched from hides keeps the wind at bay. People adapt to the cycles of plenty and scarcity. Each year brings uncertainty, yet across centuries they endure. Mystery lingers in the debate over routes south. Some scholars argue that when the glaciers began to retreat, a corridor opened between the Laurentide and Cordilleran, allowing humans to move into the interior plains. This ice-free corridor theory once dominated explanations of the peopling of the Americas. Others argue that the corridor opened too late, after humans were already present farther south. Instead, they propose a coastal route, with people moving along the Pacific Rim using boats and exploiting marine resources. The truth may involve both, but the sequence remains unsettled. The problem of evidence is severe. Most early camps would have been built along rivers or coasts now buried beneath ice or drowned by rising seas. Archaeologists search for clues in permafrost, in caves, and in rare preserved soils. Stone tools, flakes of chert, and charcoal fragments provide hints, but much is missing. The glaciers erased and buried landscapes, leaving few direct traces. The impact of these glaciers extends beyond human movement. They reshape ecosystems. South of the ice, lands are colder and drier, with vegetation sparse. Megafauna cluster along ice margins, feeding where plants survive. Meltwater creates massive lakes, some stretching hundreds of kilometers. These lakes form barriers and corridors in their own right, influencing where animals, and eventually humans, can travel. The entire continent is reshaped by the presence of ice. Among the lesser-known observations is the way glaciers influence winds. As cold air descends from their surfaces, powerful katabatic winds sweep outward, chilling surrounding regions. For people living on the edge of the ice, these winds add to the harshness of life. Shelters must withstand not only cold, but also relentless gusts. Fires must be shielded from blowing snow. The very air is shaped by the presence of ice. Despite confinement, the people of Beringia are not static. Over centuries, their technology shifts. Stone tool traditions evolve, with microblades, tiny, sharp fragments set into wooden or bone handles, appearing in the archaeological record. These allow efficient use of stone, a valuable resource in places where quality material is scarce. Such innovations reflect ongoing adaptation, even during long isolation. The great glaciers, seemingly eternal to date, are not permanent. Slowly, after thousands of years, they begin to weaken. Temperatures rise, summers lengthen, glacial fronts retreat, first by meters, then by kilometers. Meltwater carves new rivers and floods valleys. The ice-free corridor begins to appear, though when it became fully passable remains debated. Along the coast, retreating glaciers expose shorelines, creating potential pathways south. The prison begins to open, though cautiously and unevenly. For humans, these changes are both opportunity and risk. New lands offer new resources, but also uncertainty. Paths may close again if the climate shifts. Animals move into freshly opened valley, drawing hunters after them. Slowly, humans begin to expand beyond Beringia. Yet for thousands of years before this moment, they remain blocked, held at the threshold by glaciers too vast to cross. The story of these ice sheets is not only about obstacles, but about time. To modern eyes, thousands of years of waiting seems extraordinary. Yet to those who lived then, there was no sense of delay. Life was lived day by day, hunting, gathering, making fires, raising children. The ice wall to the south was simply part of the world, as natural and enduring as mountains or seas. Only when it retreated did its temporary nature become clear. In the long arc of human migration, the sealed path south is a reminder of scale. Planetary forces set the pace. Glaciers grow and melt on timescales of millennia, and human lives unfold within those boundaries. The people of Beringia endured because they adapted to what the earth allowed. When the glaciers finally opened, they were ready. But for millennia before, their world was defined by the walls of ice. Along the frozen edge of the great Ice Age world, human presence lingers in traces so faint they are almost whispers. Archaeologists call them the shadows of ancient camps. A dark stain in frozen soil marks where a hearth once burned. A splinter of stone, chipped away from a blade, lies waiting in permafrost. A fragment of bone, scored with shallow cut marks, shows where hunters sliced away flesh. Together, these scattered remains tell of people living on the threshold of survival at the edge of the ice. The Bluefish Caves of the Yukon provide one of the earliest glimpses. Inside, bones more than 20,000 years old have been found with markings that resemble cuts made by stone tools. Some bones were split open, likely to reach the rich marrow within. The evidence is debated, but if correct, it shows that humans lived here during the height of the last glacial maximum, when glaciers sealed the way south. To survive so far north in such conditions would have required skill, knowledge, and remarkable resilience. Daily life in these camps was organized around fire. Hearths provided warmth in winters where temperatures dropped far below freezing. They also served as centers for cooking, tool-making, and social life. A layer of charcoal, preserved in frozen ground, is all that remains today. But once it was the heart of a community. Around the flames, hunters repaired weapons, women and men sewed clothing, and children learned the tasks that kept life possible. Food came from many sources. Large animals such as reindeer, caribou, and bison provided meat and hides. Mammoths, though dangerous, were sometimes hunted or scavenged. Smaller animals, hares, birds, foxes, were caught with snares. Rivers and lakes offered fish, and in brief summers, berries and roots added variety. Archaeologists studying bone assemblages find evidence of marrow extraction, a clear sign that no part of an animal was wasted. Fat and marrow gave concentrated calories essential for enduring the long cold. The shelters of these camps were likely temporary, adapted to seasons. In summer, light structures of wood and hide sufficed. In winter, Sturdier dwellings were needed. Some sites show circles of mammoth bones, interpreted as the bases of large huts, covered with hides and packed with snow for insulation. These structures could withstand fierce winds. Bone needles pierced with fine eyes reveal the skill of sewing, suggesting tailored clothing that fit closely to the body, protecting against frostbite. Without such garments, life on the edge of the glaciers would not have been possible. Among the lesser-known details are the ornaments found in some of these sites. Beads carved from ivory, pendants made of animal teeth, fragments of ochre used as pigment all appear even in harshest regions. Such items had no direct survival value, yet people carried them. They point to symbolic life, personal identity, group belonging, or rituals we can no longer reconstruct. Even on the icy frontier, humans expressed meaning through objects. Mysteries remain. Were these camps year-round settlements, or only used seasonally when herds moved through? Did groups retreat southward in the harshest winters and return in summer? Archaeological layers are thin, often showing repeated but brief visit. The evidence suggests flexibility. People likely shifted strategies according to climate and resources, sometimes enduring, sometimes withdrawing. This adaptability itself was a survival tool. At Swan Point in Alaska, archaeologists have uncovered microblade technology dating to about 14,000 years ago. Small, sharp stone flakes were inset into bone or wooden shafts to make efficient cutting tools. This tradition links directly to Siberian cultures, showing the flow of knowledge across Beringia. It is not only the movement of people that is recorded here, but the persistence of ideas carried from one generation to the next across thousands of kilometers. Planetary forces shaped every camp. The glaciers determined where herds could graze, which rivers remained open, and which valleys lay buried in ice. Meltwater sometimes created vast lakes that cut across the land, blocking routes or altering migrations. Dust from glacial winds settled on the plains, changing soils and vegetation. To live at the margin of ice was to live within the constant influence of planetary scale processes. Even the skies reflected this setting. In the long polar nights, the aurora would have shone overhead, shimmering in curtains of green and red. To the people gathered around hearths, this was part of their lived environment, as real as the herds or the rivers. Though we cannot know their interpretations, the presence of light across the sky must have entered their cultural imagination. The archaeological record is fragmentary, yet it preserves diversity. Bones with cut marks, flakes from tool-making, and concentrations of charcoal are most common, but occasionally rarer finds appear. A decorated piece of ivory, a pierced bead, a polished bone point. These artifacts provide depth, reminding us that ancient camps were more than survival stations. They were also places of community, where meaning and memory were created. The greatest mystery is whether the people who lived at these margins were the direct ancestors of those who later spread throughout the Americas. Some scholars argue yes, that continuity links the Bluefish Caves, Swan Point, and later sites to the first widespread expansion southward. Others suggest that these were isolated groups, perhaps replaced by later waves. The evidence is not yet sufficient to decide. What is certain is that humans were present here, holding the line at the very edge of what was possible. On a planetary scale, the scale of time is daunting. If humans lived in Beringia and its fringes more than 20,000 years ago, then they endured thousands of years before migration into the Americas was even possible. To them, there was no waiting, Life was simply lived, season by season. But in the larger picture, these millennia form a long prelude, a shadowed pause before the opening of new continents. These camps, fragile in their remains, stand as reminders. They show how far humans were willing to go, how adaptable they could be, and how deeply tied their lives were to the rhythms of ice and earth. The glaciers stood immovable, yet people found ways to persist along their edges. When the ice finally began to retreat, those same traditions of fire, tool-making, and flexible movement prepared them for the step into the unknown lands beyond. As the Ice Age slowly loosens its grip, the vast walls of ice that had long sealed the interior of North America begin to change. The Laurentide and Cordilleran ice sheets, once united in an unbroken barrier, start to retreat. Meltwater carves channels across the landscape, feeding massive lakes and rivers. Valleys emerge from beneath the ice, exposing plains where plants begin to grow. For humans waiting in Beringia, these shifting conditions create new possibilities. Corridors appear between the glaciers, windows in the ice that may allow passage into the heart of the continent. The concept of an ice-free corridor is one of the central debates in the study of early American migration. For decades, archaeologists believed that when the glaciers separated, they opened a narrow band of habitable land stretching from Alaska into the interior plains. Through this corridor, humans could move southward, following herds of bison and other game. It was long thought to be the main route of the first Americans. Yet evidence now shows that the story is more complex. The corridor may not have been open early enough, or fertile enough, to support travelers until long after people already lived far to the south. Still, the corridor remains important. It demonstrates how human movement was tied directly to planetary processes. Ice sheets advanced and retreated on timescales of centuries and millennia. Only when warming reached a certain threshold did the two massive glaciers pull apart, leaving a potential route south. For people in Beringia, this was a decisive change. A barrier that had endured for thousands of years began to weaken, revealing glimpses of a world beyond. Archaeological evidence along the corridor is sparse, partly because glaciers scoured the land, erasing traces of earlier life. Yet the few sites that remain show possible signs of human use. Camps appear near glacial lakes, where meltwater pooled between ice walls. Stone tools, scrapers, and fragments of charcoal hint that groups may have moved through when conditions allowed. Still, the scarcity of finds leaves questions. Was the corridor a primary route, or only one of several possibilities? Alongside this inland path, scholars consider the coastal route hypothesis. As the Cordilleran ice sheet retreated from the Pacific shore, it exposed islands, beaches, and kelp-rich waters. Here, humans could have followed a kelp highway, using small boats or rafts to travel along the coast. The sea offered fish, shellfish, and marine mammals, resources available even when land remained icy. Archaeological evidence is difficult to find, for rising seas have since drowned much of the ancient coastline, yet discoveries of early sites on islands and nearshore regions suggest that coastal travel was possible. The coexistence of these two routes, the interior corridor and the Pacific Rim, remains a major scientific mystery. Did humans move through one, the other, or both? Some genetic studies suggest multiple waves of migration, possibly using different paths. Others argue for a single main entry. Later, spreading across the continent. The question is unresolved, but the opening of windows in the ice remains central to any explanation. Lesser-known details reveal how challenging the corridor would have been. Newly exposed land between glaciers was initially barren, scraped of soil and vegetation. It would take centuries for plants to recolonize, for animals to return in numbers large enough to support hunters. Archaeological evidence indicates that by around 13,000 years ago, the corridor did host bison, elk, and waterfowl, along with stands of willow and birch. Only then would it have become a viable route. If humans were already far south by that time, then another path must have been used earlier. On a planetary scale, the retreat of glaciers transformed entire regions. Meltwater from the ice sheets created vast proglacial lakes, some larger than modern inland seas. Glacial Lake Agassiz, for example, stretched across much of central Canada, holding more water than all the Great Lakes combined. These lakes influenced climate, created barriers, and occasionally burst, sending floods racing across the land. For humans, they formed both obstacles and opportunities, shaping where camps could be built and how animals migrated. Daily life for those moving through these emerging corridors would have been precarious. Food supplies were uncertain, weather unpredictable. Hunters needed to adapt constantly, shifting from fishing in meltwater streams to stalking bison on new grasslands. Camps were temporary, often abandoned after a single season. Fires burned with driftwood or brush. Scarce resources in landscapes still recovering from glacial cover. To move through the corridor was not only a physical challenge, but a test of flexibility. Mystery deepens when considering timing. Archaeological sites such as Monteverde in Chile, dated to at least 14,500 years ago, show that humans were already deep in South America before the corridor was fully open. This suggests that migration into the Americas began earlier, possibly along the coast. Yet interior routes may still have played a role later, as populations expanded and spread northward again. The balance between these pathways remains one of prehistory's unsolved puzzles. Another lesser-known piece of evidence comes from genetic data tied to plant and animal populations. Studies of bison lineages show that herds moved through the corridor as it opened, expanding into new grasslands. Humans may have followed, tracking familiar prey. Pollen records also show the sequence of ecological recovery, first moss and lichen, then shrubs, then grasses, then trees. The slow greening of the corridor would have mirrored the gradual movement of people into it. At night, in these new valleys, the sound of melting ice would have echoed, dripping water, shifting glaciers, and the crack of carving ice walls. Fires lit on bare ground mark the human presence amid forces still vast and unstable. Archaeological traces of these fires, tiny flecks of charcoal, remain today. Small but profound witnesses to the first experiments in moving south. Planetary processes continued to shape options. The retreat of glaciers not only opened corridors but also raised sea levels. As the ice melted, coasts shifted, islands drowned, and Beringia itself began to vanish beneath rising seas. For humans, this meant both opportunity and urgency. New lands appeared in the south, but old homelands in the north slowly disappeared. Migration was not simply exploration, but adaptation to a world in flux. The scale of these changes is staggering. What appeared to humans as gradual shifts across generations were, in planetary terms, rapid transformations. Valleys carved by ice became open grasslands in a few centuries. Rivers swelled, redirected, or drained as lakes burst. For communities watching from campfires, the world itself was unstable, a living system that opened and closed doors without warning. The opening of windows in the ice was not the end of waiting, but the beginning of movement. Humans stepped cautiously into new lands, uncertain what lay ahead. Some followed inland routes, others the sea. Some may have failed, retreating back to Beringia. Others pressed on, setting the stage for the great spread across 2 continents. The ice dictated the pace, but human persistence ensured the journey continued. Along the far edge of the Pacific, where ice once pressed against the sea, a narrow band of land begins to open as the Cordilleran ice sheet retreats. Beaches, headlands, and scattered islands emerge from beneath the frozen weight. Here, unlike the barren corridors carved between glaciers inland, life quickly returns. Kelp forests anchor to the shallows, creating dense ecosystems. Shellfish cling to rocks. Fish gather in tidal waters. Seals, sea lions, and seabirds occupy the shore. For humans searching for a path south, the coast offers possibilities the ice-locked interior cannot. This idea, often called the coastal migration hypothesis, imagines that people moved not only across land but also along the ocean's edge. Boats, rafts, or skin-covered frames may have carried families across bays and straits. Camps were set on beaches, then abandoned as groups continued southward. The sea became a highway, its resources abundant and predictable. Archaeologists describe this route as the Kelp Highway, for kelp forests provided food, shelter for marine life, and continuity from Asia to the Americas. The ecological advantages of the coast are clear. Shellfish could be gathered year-round, regardless of season. Fish were plentiful in tidal zones. Sea mammals provided rich meat and hides for clothing. Birds nested by the thousands on cliffs and islands, their eggs collected in spring. For people accustomed to fishing rivers in Siberia and Beringia, adapting to the ocean may have been natural. Fire-heated stones could boil water for cooking clams. Harpoons tipped with bone or stone could pierce seals. The ocean gave not only food, but also a corridor stretching unbroken for thousands of kilometers. One lesser-known detail of this theory comes from the Channel Islands off California. Here, sites more than 12,000 years old contain tools suited to maritime life, points shaped for fishing, and middens filled with shells. These finds show that by the end of the Ice Age, humans were fully adapted to the sea. If such knowledge existed, then its roots may reach deeper, back to the first migrations along the Pacific coast. Yet mysteries remain. The most ancient coastal camps are gone, drowned when rising seas covered the Ice Age shorelines. Sea levels have risen more than 100 meters since that time, erasing beaches and bays where early travelers once lived. Archaeologists now search the ocean floor with sonar, hoping to find submerged sites. The scarcity of direct evidence leaves the coastal route debated. Its reality suggested more by logic and scattered finds than by excavated camps. Planetary forces determined this loss. As glaciers melted, oceans rose steadily, swallowing low-lying coasts. What were once broad plains with rivers and estuaries are now seafloor. The memory of those landscapes survives only in drowned valleys and offshore plateaus. The Pacific Rim itself was transformed, its shape reshaped by tides and ice. The human story of migration here is bound to planetary rhythms of sea and climate. Daily life along this path would have been dynamic. Camps established near tide lines were temporary. lasting only until food was exhausted or conditions changed. Fires burned with driftwood collected from beaches. Nets, lines, or simple weirs caught fish. Shells accumulated in heaps that slowly grew into middens. At night, waves set the rhythm of rest, while the glow of campfires marked human presence on shores otherwise ruled by wind and sea. The distances covered are immense. From the Bering Strait to the southern tip of South America spans more than 15,000 kilometers. Yet if each generation advanced only a little, perhaps following seasonal migrations or moving when resources dwindled, then within a few centuries humans could spread along the entire length of the Americas. Archaeological sites in Chile, such as Monte Verde dated to at least 14,500 years ago, demonstrate that humans reached far south surprisingly early. The coastal highway offers one explanation for this rapid dispersal. Another lesser-known piece of evidence comes from plant remains. At Monteverde, archaeologists found charred seaweed in hearths, showing that marine resources were central to life even in inland valleys. This detail suggests continuity with coastal traditions. If seaweed was burned in Chile more than 14,000 years ago, then knowledge of harvesting from the ocean must have traveled the length of the continent. Mystery surrounds the boats themselves. None survive from the Ice Age for wood, and hides decay quickly, yet indirect evidence points to their existence. By 45,000 years ago, humans had already crossed water to reach Australia, a feat requiring some form of watercraft. If that technology existed then, it likely persisted into the migration of the Americas. Even the simplest rafts or dugouts would have sufficed for short crossings between islands and bays. Planetary scale is evident again in the productivity of kelp forests. These ecosystems, rich in nutrients, spanned the Pacific Rim during the Ice Age much as they do today. They provided continuity, ensuring that wherever people traveled along the coast, similar foods could be found. The kelp highway was not just a metaphor, but a real ecological bridge, linking environments from Asia to the Americas. Archaeological work in the Pacific Northwest strengthens this picture. On Haida Gwaii and other islands, sites dated to more than 13,000 years ago reveal human activity, stone tools, animal remains, and signs of fishing. These discoveries push the timeline back and support the idea that people lived by the sea earlier than once believed. More may lie hidden underwater, waiting to be uncovered. Daily life for coastal travelers contrasted with that of steppe hunters. Instead of herds stretching across grasslands, they looked to tides and waves. Instead of mammoth bones for dwellings, driftwood and hides created shelters. Instead of drying vast stores of reindeer meat, they harvested shellfish, seaweed, and fish. Yet the essentials remained constant: fire for warmth, tools for survival, clothing for protection, and the passing on of skills from one generation to the next. The question remains whether this was the primary route south or one of several. Some scholars argue that without the coast, the speed of early dispersal into South America cannot be explained. Others caution that inland corridors still played roles later. Once conditions improved, the truth may be a combination, with multiple pathways used at different times. What is clear is that the coast offered opportunity long before the ice-free corridor was fully open. On a planetary level, this migration reflects the adaptability of humans to nearly every environment. From Arctic tundra to temperate shores, they shifted diets, tools, and strategies. The Pacific coast, with its kelp forests and shifting tides, was part of this story. Step by step, and perhaps paddle by paddle, Humans advanced along the edge of a continent, guided by the sea's resources. Though the direct evidence lies drowned beneath the waves, the logic of ecology and the scattered clues above water suggest that the first Americans may well have followed the Pacific shore. Where the glaciers closed the interior, the ocean opened its door. The kelp highway stretched southward, inviting travelers into new worlds. The moment finally comes when humans begin to move beyond the icy barriers that had long confined them. For generations, communities in Beringia endured within their northern refuge, but as glaciers retreat, new lands appear. Slowly, pathways open, whether through interior corridors between ice sheets or along the Pacific Rim. Families step forward, traveling into a continent no human has ever seen before. This long descent into the Americas is not sudden, but gradual, unfolding across centuries, one small migration at a time. The first landscapes they encounter are raw, recently uncovered by melting ice. Valleys scraped bare by glaciers hold fresh rivers and lakes, their waters milky with glacial silt. Plants begin to colonize the soil, mosses, grasses, and shrubs that cling to the land. Animals arrive quickly. Bison graze on new grass. Elk and caribou wander into the openings. Waterfowl fill the lakes each spring and autumn. For humans, these pioneers signal that the land is habitable. The migration follows them. Archaeologists studying pollen records find evidence of this sequence. Around 14,000 years ago, willows and birch began spreading into newly opened valleys, followed soon after by grass and larger plants. The presence of trees and shrubs provided fuel for fires and wood for tools. Ecological recovery created the foundations for human life. Migration southward was not only a matter of movement, it depended on the Earth's slow greening after the Ice Age. The scale of the journey was immense. To travel from Alaska into the continental interior was like stepping into a world both familiar and strange. Hunters found herds similar to those of Siberia, bison, elk, and caribou, but alongside them were species unknown in the Old World, giant ground sloths, saber-toothed cats, and camels unique to North America. The people entering these lands faced challenges unlike any encountered before, yet with each new encounter, they adapted, reshaping traditions to fit the environments ahead. One lesser-known detail is found in ancient footprints. In White Sands, in New Mexico, a vast flat of gypsum preserves human tracks dating back at least 23,000 years, though the dates are debated, if correct. These prints show that humans reached the continent's interior far earlier than traditional models suggest. Long trails of footprints, some belonging to children, trace paths across muddy ground. Though the dating remains contested, such evidence reminds us that human presence was broader and perhaps earlier than once believed. Mysteries still surround the pace of dispersal. Genetic studies show that within a few thousand years of initial entry, human populations had spread across both North and South America. This rapid expansion raises questions. Did small groups move swiftly along rivers, following their currents deep inland? Did coastal travelers move faster, using boats to cover long distances? Or were there multiple expansions, overlapping and intermingling? Archaeologists and geneticists debate these questions, but consensus is still forming. Planetary forces again play a role. As glaciers retreated, sea levels rose. Rivers swelled with meltwater, carving new channels. Vast glacial lakes formed across the continent. Some, like glacial Lake Missoula, repeatedly burst, sending catastrophic floods across the land. These events reshaped terrain, depositing sediments, eroding valleys, creating barriers. Humans migrating southward moved within this dynamic, unstable environment, adjusting routes as waters changed. The landscape itself was in flux, opening some paths while closing others. For those traveling, daily life required constant adaptation. Camps were set near rivers for fish and water. Hides were stretched on frames to dry in the wind. Fires burned with wood gathered from birch and willow. Meat was smoked and stored. Children learned to track animals in unfamiliar forests, and adults experimented with new prey. Over time, traditions shifted. Tools suited to hunting reindeer were modified to hunt bison or elk. Spears were adapted to different animals. The migration was not only physical movement but cultural transformation. Archaeological sites capture moments of this change. At sites in the interior plains, stone tools of distinctive styles, such as Clovis points, appear around 13,000 years ago. Their sharp, fluted design reflects innovation, suited to new environments. Clovis tools spread rapidly across the continent, evidence of swift dispersal and cultural sharing. Though their exact origin is debated, they represent the creativity of early Americans adapting to fresh opportunities. Another lesser-known detail comes from remains of burned plants. At some sites, layers of ancient soil contain microscopic charcoal, evidence of deliberate burning. Early migrants may have used fire to clear land, drive game, or manage plant growth. If so, then human influence on American ecosystems began almost as soon as people arrived. This practice, repeated over generations, shaped landscapes long before agriculture. The mysteries extend to timing. Some sites suggest human presence south of the ice before 14,000 years ago, perhaps as early as 16,000. Others propose even earlier dates. Each new discovery reshapes the debate. What is certain is that by the end of the Ice Age, humans were present across the length of the continents, from Arctic tundra to Andean highlands. The speed of this spread remains astonishing, even if the precise sequence is unclear. On a planetary scale, the migration into the Americas was the last great expansion of humanity across unoccupied continents. Africa, Eurasia, and Australia had long been settled. Only the Americas remained untouched. With this crossing, humans achieved a global presence, completing a story of movement that began tens of thousands of years earlier in Africa. The opening of the Americas marked the final chapter of that vast dispersal. Daily life for those first families must have balanced exploration with survival. Each valley held unknown plants, animals, and climates. Some camps were abandoned quickly, others became longer-term bases. Children grew up never knowing Beringia, thinking of these new lands as their only home. For them, migration was not extraordinary. It was simply life, shaped by rivers, forests, and plains that stretched endlessly ahead. The scale of their achievement can be measured in distance. From Beringia to the southern tip of South America is farther than from Madrid to Tokyo. Yet within only a few millennia, this distance was covered. Hunters followed herds across plains. Fishers traced rivers to their sources. Coastal groups paddled along shorelines, piece by piece. The continents filled with human presence. The long descent into the Americas was therefore not a single leap, but a gradual unfolding. Step by step, family by family, people moved southward, leaving faint traces that endure in soil and stone. Each new campfire, each stone tool, each footprint added to the record of migration. Though mysteries remain about routes and timing, the overall picture is clear. Once pathways opened, humans moved quickly and decisively, making the Americas part of their world. Across the unfolding landscapes of the Americas, one of the most delicate forms of evidence remains underfoot, footprints pressed into soft ground thousands of years ago. Unlike stone tools or bones, footprints are direct impressions of human presence. They record not only that people were there, but also how they moved, whether in groups alone, quickly, or slowly. Among the most remarkable examples are the tracks discovered at White Sands in New Mexico, which have drawn global attention to the earliest undeniable presence of humans in the Americas. At White Sands, in a dry basin once filled with a shallow lake, layers of soft gypsum preserved a series of human footprints stretching for kilometers. These prints, some small and belonging to children, others larger and likely adult, are dated to at least 23,000 years ago. The dating, based on seeds trapped within layers above and below the tracks, remains debated, but if correct, the implications are immense. It would mean that humans were present in the Americas during the height of the last glacial maximum, far earlier than most migration models had suggested. The footprints are not isolated. They form trails that show direction, pace, and interaction. Some move in straight lines, others meander. One sequence appears to record a young individual carrying a child for long stretches, setting the child down at intervals before lifting them again. Another trail overlaps with tracks of giant sloths and mammoths, showing that humans and Ice Age megafauna shared this landscape directly, in a way no artifact can. Footprints capture moments of life. Lesser-known details include the conditions that allowed these tracks to survive. The playa of White Sands, rich in gypsum, created fine sediment that could hold impressions sharply. Periodic flooding and drying buried the tracks under layers of silt, preserving them. Over millennia, shifting sands covered and revealed them again. The survival of such fragile traces is rare, making the site extraordinary. Elsewhere in the Americas, hints of ancient footprints have been found, but none so extensive or so well dated. The mystery lies in what these tracks mean for migration. If humans walked across New Mexico more than 20,000 years ago, then they must have entered the Americas long before the retreat of glaciers and the opening of the classic ice-free corridor. Did they follow a coastal route even earlier than current models allow? Or did they enter during an undocumented warm interval, only to become isolated again by advancing ice? The answers remain elusive, but the footprints compel a rethinking of old assumptions. On a planetary scale, the preservation of such fragile evidence reminds us how climate and geology shape what survives. Most footprints vanish within hours or days, erased by wind or rain. Only in rare conditions, fine sediment, gentle burial, and long stability do they endure. That White Sands preserved so many over such a span is a testament to the unique interplay of lake, wind, and desert. Similar conditions elsewhere may hide other ancient tracks still waiting discovery beneath layers of earth. Beyond White Sands, other footprint sites offer glimpses of early life. In Chile, tracks preserved near Monteverde appear alongside evidence of wooden structures and hearths. In Argentina, at Pehuenco, human and animal footprints mingle on ancient coastal flats. These cases, though not as extensive, support the idea that humans left their mark literally upon the land long before written memory, together they show that the story of early migration can be read in the ground itself. Daily life revealed in footprints is humble yet powerful. A trail of children playing by a shoreline, a set of prints leading to a cluster of hearths, the path of a hunter following a herd. Unlike tools, which may be carried far from where they were made, footprints belong to moments in time. They freeze the step of a single person on a single day. For archaeologists, this immediacy is invaluable, bridging thousands of years in a direct human gesture. Another lesser-known aspect of footprint research is the ability to analyze gait and speed. Some tracks show slipping, others a running pace. By measuring stride length, scientists can estimate whether individuals were walking slowly or moving quickly. At White Sands, some trails indicate long-distance walking, perhaps migration from one camp to another. Others suggest brief excursions, like collecting plants or checking on water. These details flesh out the rhythm of daily life in ways that stone tools alone cannot. Mystery deepens when footprints are paired with animal tracks. At White Sands, prints of humans overlap with those of giant sloths. In some cases, the sloths' tracks change direction sharply near human trails, suggesting awareness and avoidance. Did humans hunt them, or did they merely pass nearby? Similar overlap with mammoth tracks suggests that humans lived alongside these massive creatures, though direct evidence of interaction remains sparse. Still, the footprints show coexistence, a living landscape of humans and megafauna. Planetary changes framed all of this. As the Ice Age waned, climates shifted, lakes filled and dried, and deserts expanded. Each cycle preserved or erased traces of life. Footprints endure not in spite of change, but because of it, because sediments shifted at just the right moment, because waters rose and fell with precise timing. The survival of White Sands tracks is thus both improbable and profound, a reminder of how fragile the archaeological record can be. The significance of footprints extends beyond dating migration. They also reveal population structure. At White Sands, the abundance of child tracks suggests that whole families traveled together, not only small groups of hunters. This reinforces the idea that migration was not an expedition but a resettlement. People moved with children, elders, and daily tools, carrying culture as well as survival. Migration was not only about reaching new land, but about living in it fully. Other traces reinforce this picture. In some South American sites, handprints and footprints appear on cave walls and floors, mingling symbolic expression with physical presence. These imprints blur the line between art and evidence. Were they decoration, ritual, or simply children pressing hands into soft surfaces? The meaning is unclear, but the message is human presence, enduring across millennia. The great mystery remains unresolved. If White Sands is correctly dated to more than 23,000 years ago, it pushes human entry into the Americas back beyond the last glacial barriers. If the dating proves younger, it still confirms that humans were widespread, earlier than once thought. Either way, the site reshapes understanding. The question is not whether humans were present, but how early, how often, and by which paths they arrived. On a planetary scale, the story of footprints highlights the delicate intersection of geology, climate, and humanity. A step pressed into mud under Ice Age skies survived because sediments hardened, waters receded, and sands shifted just enough to protect it. That survival now challenges scientific models, reminding us that even the smallest trace can alter vast narratives. The first footprints on new shores, whether in New Mexico, Chile, or Argentina, are not just markers of migration, they are voices of presence. Each one records a step into the unknown, a step into a continent that would become home. For archaeologists, they are evidence. For the wider story of humanity, they are symbols of persistence, adaptability, and the enduring record humans leave upon the earth itself. When the first people entered the America, they stepped into landscapes unlike any they had seen before. The continents were alive with creatures of astonishing size and variety. Herds of mammoths moved across grasslands, their tusks sweeping wide arcs above the ground. Mastodons browsed in forests, tearing down branches with trunks and teeth. Bison, much larger than their modern descendants, thundered across open plains in vast numbers. Strange giants, the ground sloths, towering at over 4 meters in height, lumbered slowly, stripping trees of leaves. Horses and camels, native to the Americas, grazed in herds. Predators such as saber-toothed cats, dire wolves, and the immense short-faced bear stalked these lands. For humans, fresh from Beringia, this was both a familiar and an entirely new world. Mammoths were among the most critical animals encountered. Similar to the woolly mammoths of Siberia, they fed on the grasses of the mammoth steppe, shaping ecosystems as they moved. Their trails cut across valleys, leading hunters to water and pasture. For human communities, mammoths meant food, hides for tents and clothing, bones for shelters, and ivory for tools and ornaments. Archaeological evidence from Clovis sites in North America shows mammoth remains associated with fluted spear points, clear signs of deliberate hunting. These kill sites reflect coordination and skill, as taking down such a giant required the cooperation of many hunters. Mastodons offered different challenges. At living in woodlands, they were less visible than mammoths but equally valuable. At several sites in the Great Lakes region, mastodon bones show cut marks left by stone tools. In some cases, wooden spear fragments have been found embedded in ribs, evidence of direct hunting. These finds demonstrate that early Americans were not simply following plains herds, but were also adapting to forest prey. Each environment demanded new strategies, and humans proved flexible. One lesser-known detail comes from protein residue analysis on ancient tools. Tiny traces of animal protein cling to stone points long after bones have decayed. At some sites, mastodon proteins have been identified on Clovis points, confirming that these tools were used to process the giants of the American forests. Such microscopic evidence, invisible to the naked eye, strengthens the picture of human-megafauna interaction. Mystery surrounds the role of humans in the eventual disappearance of these animals. By about 10,000 years ago, mammoths, mastodons, ground sloths, saber-toothed cats, and many others were gone. Did overhunting by humans cause their extinction, or was climate change the decisive factor? The warming of the Holocene reshaped habitats, reducing grasslands and expanding forests. Populations of large grazers shrank. Yet, the close timing of human arrival and megafaunal decline suggests that hunting added pressure. Most scholars now consider a combination of climate and human activity as the cause, though the balance between them is still debated. On a planetary scale, this extinction event mirrors patterns seen elsewhere. In Australia, marsupial giants vanished soon after human arrival. In Eurasia, mammoths declined as people spread and climates warmed. The Americas represented the last great stage of this global drama. where humans and giants coexisted for only a brief span before the world changed forever. Archaeological sites reveal the practical uses of these animals. At Murray Springs in Arizona, mammoth remains lie beside fluted spear points, stone knives, and fire-cracked rocks. The butchering process is visible in the placement of bones, ribs separated, marrow bones split, tusks removed. Elsewhere, mass bison kill sites reveal strategies of driving herds into traps or over cliffs. Such techniques echo hunting practices seen across the Old World, adapted to the new species of the Americas. Daily life with megafauna nearby must have been intense. A herd of bison provided abundance, but hunting them required risk. Mammoths could charge and crush hunters if attacked carelessly. Predators prowled at the edges of herds. Short-faced bears, among the largest carnivores ever to live, may have dominated kill sites, forcing humans to defend carcasses with fire and weapons. In such encounters, survival depended on cooperation, planning, and courage. Another lesser-known piece of evidence is a small carving from Florida, etched into a piece of ivory. It depicts a mammoth or mastodon with surprising clarity. Though rare, such symbolic objects suggest that these animals were more than prey. They likely held cultural and spiritual significance. In Eurasia, cave art preserved images of mammoths, bison, and lions. In the Americas, portable art hints at similar traditions. Though much is lost, mystery remains about the speed of human adaptation. Did new migrants instantly recognize how to hunt camels and horses, or did knowledge build gradually? Archaeological timelines suggest quick adjustment. Within centuries of entering new regions, toolkits shifted, prey choices broadened, and settlement expanded. The rapid development of Clovis technology, with its distinctive fluted points, shows that innovation followed quickly in response to new challenges. Planetary forces shaped these encounters. As the Ice Age ended, ecosystems reorganized. Glacial lakes formed and drained, altering river systems. Grasslands shrank as forests expanded. The distribution of prey changed. Humans moved within this shifting framework, tracking animals as they adapted their own ranges. The great migrations of people were interwoven with the migrations of the giants. For daily survival, the rewards of hunting megafauna were immense. A single mammoth could feed a group for weeks, providing fat, protein, and material for tools. Yet reliance on such animals also carried risk. If herds declined, scarcity could follow. Archaeological evidence suggests that communities balanced large game hunting with small game, fishing, and gathering. Flexibility was the key, as it had been during earlier migrations across Eurasia and Beringia. Another lesser-known element is the hunting of American horses and camels. Though now absent from the continent, these animals were common during the Ice Age. Cut marks on bones confirm that humans hunted them. Their extinction removed species that had evolved in the Americas over millions of years, altering ecosystems permanently. Ironically, horses would later return with Europeans thousands of years later, reshaping the Americas once again. The great mystery persists. Why did all these giants vanish in such a short span? Climate change alone had occurred many times before without causing mass extinctions. Human hunting alone seems insufficient to explain the disappearance of so many species. The combination hypothesis, human pressure, added to fragile ecosystems under climate stress, remains the leading view. Yet uncertainties endure, and each new discovery of bones or tools adds nuance to the debate. On a planetary scale, the encounter between humans and Ice Age giants in the Americas was the last act of a long story. from Africa to Eurasia to Australia. Humans had already met and altered ecosystems filled with great animals. The Americas offered a final frontier, a final meeting of people and giants. In that brief coexistence, humans secured their survival. But the world of megafauna faded. For those early communities, however, extinction was not yet visible. To them, mammoths, mastodons, bison, and sloths were daily realities. Their fires burned near herds. Their tools bore the marks of butchery. Their ornaments carried shapes of giants. The presence of these animals defined their world. Only later, as centuries passed, would the absence of giants reshape the landscape forever. In the evenings of the first Americans, fire was the center of life. After long days of hunting, fishing, or gathering, flames burned in circles of stone or hollows in the ground. The glow pushed back the vast dark of Ice Age nights, giving warmth, protection, and a place for food to be cooked. These firelit gatherings left traces that still survive. Small lenses of charcoal, blackened soil, fractured rocks, and ash scattered in ancient layers. Archaeologists studying these remnants pieced together the nightly routines of communities who entered unfamiliar forests and valleys. Fire was more than heat. It transformed landscapes. Wood gathered from willow and birch burned with steady flames. Driftwood collected from rivers and coasts fed beachside hearths. In some cases, bones were used as fuel, their marrow-rich interiors crackling as they burned. The survival of humans in new environments depended on this constant resource. Without fire, cold, predators, and hunger would have overwhelmed. With it, families endured. Lesser-known details of early hearths come from microscopic studies. Soil samples reveal phytoliths, tiny silica particles from plants that show what was burned. Seeds and nutshells occasionally survive, carbonized by fire. These finds reveal diets more varied than hunting alone. People roasted seeds, cooked roots, dried berries. Fire thus became both a means of preservation and of expanding food options. Such subtle traces remind us that even in Ice Age camps, daily meals were complex affairs. The mystery lies in how fire traditions spread. Did techniques for building hearths differ between coastal migrants and inland groups? Were some fires enclosed with stone rings, while others burned openly on sand? Archaeological evidence suggests diversity. In river valleys, hearths appear as deep black stains, reused over and over. On windy coasts, fires may have been sheltered in pits. The variability shows adaptation to place, but the essence was shared. Fire is the constant of human life. On a planetary scale, firelight symbolized the human niche itself. While glaciers carved valleys and herds roamed plains, humans brought fire wherever they went. No other species carried flames across continents. In this sense, each hearth represents the extension of human presence into environments otherwise inhospitable. A frozen plain at night, lit by stars and aurora, became habitable because a small circle of fire burned. Archaeological sites across the Americas bear this evidence. At Monteverde in Chile, small hearths contain charcoal dated to more than 14,000 years ago. Around them, remains of wooden structures and plant fibers suggest organized camps. At Paisley Caves in Oregon, coprolites, ancient human feces, are found near ash, confirming human use of fire in the region more than 14,000 years ago. Each of these hearths ties humans to landscapes at specific moments. anchoring migration in real places. Daily life around fire also included tool-making. Stone flakes were struck by firelight, creating sharp edges for hunting and processing animals. Bones were shaped into awls and needles. The glow illuminated these tasks long after sunset. In this way, fire extended the working day, allowing productivity even in darkness. For children, fire was warmth and safety, but also learning, as skills were passed down through stories and demonstrations at night. Another lesser-known trace of fire use comes from fire-cracked rocks. When stones are heated in flames and then cooled suddenly with water, they fracture. Such rocks, scattered in ancient soils, signal cooking practices. They may have been used to heat water in pits where meat, fish, or roots could be boiled. This technique, found in many cultures worldwide, appears in early American sites as well. It shows that cooking was not only roasting over open flames, but also involved more complex preparations. Mystery surrounds the symbolic uses of fire. Was it seen only as a tool, or also as a sacred force? Later indigenous traditions across the Americas often assign fire a central role in creation and ceremony. Though direct evidence from Ice Age camps is absent, it is plausible that meaning already surrounded flames. The gathering of people around hearths naturally gave fire a role in social life, shaping identity as much as survival. On a planetary scale, the fire also left its mark on ecosystems. Charcoal layers in sediments indicate that humans burned grasslands, perhaps to drive game or clear vegetation. Such practices may have begun early in the Americas, altering landscapes soon after arrival. In this way, human presence became visible not only in tools and bones, but in the very composition of soils and plant communities. Fire was both necessity and instrument of change. Archaeological layers reveal continuity. In some sites, multiple hearths appear stacked above each other, evidence of repeated return. Families came back year after year, lighting new fires in the same places. This shows that camps were not random, but embedded in memory and routine. The persistence of fire in these layers echoes the persistence of human occupation across shifting climates. Daily meals leave subtle evidence. Burned bone fragments show that marrow was extracted and cooked. Charred fish scales testify to riverside meals. Seeds of wild potato relatives, carbonized in ash, suggest gathering and cooking of plants. Each burned remain tells of a choice made by hands near fire, transforming raw resources into sustenance. These fragments allow archaeologists to reconstruct diets that otherwise would be invisible. Another lesser-known aspect is the preservation of footprints near hearths. In some sites, people stepped on soft ground by firelight, leaving impressions that hardened and survived. These footprints, mingled with ash, capture a fleeting moment, someone tending flames, someone walking past with food, someone sitting nearby. Such intimate traces connect directly to the rhythm of camp life. Mystery persists about how far fire use extended into environmental engineering. Did early Americans deliberately set grasslands alight to encourage regrowth? Did they use fire to flush animals from cover? Some evidence of broad charcoal layers suggests intentional burning, but whether this was systematic remains uncertain. If true, humans began shaping ecosystems almost as soon as they arrived. Planetary rhythms continued to shape possibilities. As climates warmed, forests expanded, providing new fuel sources. As grasslands shrank, fire may have been used to preserve open hunting grounds. In this interplay, human fire and planetary climate together sculpted the landscapes of the Americas. The importance of fire extended beyond function. Around hearths, social bonds formed, stories were told, knowledge was passed down. Songs may have been sung, shadows flickering on hides stretched across shelters. While no artifact records these sounds, the universality of fire as a center of community makes them almost certain. The hearth was the anchor of camp life, uniting survival with identity. In some, firelight was the constant thread running through the early American experience. It provided warmth in frozen nights, cooked food from new animals and plants, and protected against predators. It left charcoal and ash for archaeologists to find, silent witnesses of human life. It even reshaped ecosystems, spreading human influence across landscapes. Though tools and bones survive, it is fire that most vividly symbolizes how humans carried their world with them into unknown lands. Once people had passed through the northern gateway, the vast continents of the Americas stretched before them. Within a few thousand years, a blink in deep time, they expanded from the Arctic coasts to the windswept plains, to the dense tropical forests, and finally to the southernmost tip of Patagonia. Archaeologists describe this as one of the fastest human dispersals in prehistory. Generations moved step by step, always adjusting to new climates, new animals, and new plants. The first task in each unfamiliar region was adaptation. In the far north, where tundra stretched into frozen coasts, people relied heavily on fish, seals, and caribou. Stone scrapers and harpoon-like points mark these occupations. Further south, on the plains, large herds of bison and mammoth became central, requiring cooperative hunts and specialized spear points. In forested valleys, smaller animals and nuts, berries, and roots gained importance. Archaeological sites show this shift. Burned seeds, cracked nuts, and fish bones appear alongside the remains of large mammals. One lesser-known fact is the speed at which people settled high-altitude regions. In the Andes, archaeological layers above 3,000 meters in elevation date back more than 12,000 years. Even in the thin air and cold nights, people built hearths, made tools, and hunted camelids. The adaptation was swift, perhaps within only a few centuries of arriving in South America. Today, modern physiology shows that high-altitude living requires adjustments over generations. Yet these early families achieved it with resilience and skill. The roots of movement remain a subject of mystery. Did humans spread primarily along coasts, taking advantage of fish, shellfish, and kelp forests? Or did they also move swiftly through interior river valleys, following fresh water and game? Evidence suggests both. Coastal travel may have provided speed, while inland routes allowed deeper penetration of the continents. Rising seas since the Ice Age have drowned much of the ancient shoreline, leaving archaeologists with fragmentary evidence. The exact balance between land and sea migration is still unresolved. On a planetary scale, the timing of this expansion coincided with global shifts at the end of the Ice Age. Ice sheets retreated, releasing floods, changing rivers, and transforming grasslands into forests. Megafauna populations began to dwindle. Coastlines shrank as the oceans rose, swallowing campsites and shell middens. These changes created both opportunities and challenges. Humans spread not into a static land, but into continents reshaping beneath their feet. Daily life varied by region, yet certain rhythms endured. Families gathered around fires at dusk. Hunters carried finely flaked stone points, carefully hafted to wooden shafts. Children learned by watching adults shape hides or carve bones. In open plains, large hunts demanded cooperation, driving herds toward cliffs or corrals. In forests, smaller game and gathered plants provided steady food. Along rivers and lakes, fish nets, hooks, and traps became crucial. Each setting required distinct strategies, but all were united by adaptability. Among the cultural traces that spread widely is the use of red ochre. From Alaska to Patagonia, ochre appears in hearths, burials, and on tools. Sometimes it coated the dead, sometimes it marked stones, sometimes it stained ornaments. Its symbolic role remains uncertain, but its presence across diverse regions shows continuity in ritual practice, even as people dispersed into very different environments. Ochre served as a thread of meaning, linking distant communities across the vast new lands. Mystery persists around the earliest tropical occupations. In Brazil, stone tools and hearths dated to more than 11,000 years ago suggest rapid entry into the Amazon basin, adapting to dense rainforest. With its insects, humidity, and unfamiliar fauna, required ingenuity. How quickly people learned to exploit fruits, fish, and small animals in these ecosystems is not fully known. Archaeological preservation is poor in such climates, leaving gaps in knowledge. Still, the presence of early sites indicates that no environment proved too forbidding. Distances highlight the planetary scale of this spread. From Alaska to Tierra del Fuego spans more than 15,000 kilometers, farther than the breadth of Eurasia. Yet, in only a few thousand years, people traveled and settled along this span. Journeys unfolded gradually, one valley, one river, one coast at a time, but in deep time the speed was extraordinary. Humanity demonstrated its ability to adapt across the widest range of habitats on Earth. Another lesser-known detail is the early presence of dogs. Genetic evidence suggests dogs accompanied humans into the Americas, perhaps from their earlier domestication in Siberia. Archaeological finds of dog remains at early sites support this idea. These animals likely aided in hunting, carried loads, and provided companionship. If so, the expansion was not solely human, it was shared with the first domesticated partner species, strengthening survival across diverse lands. Mystery also surrounds the fate of megafauna. As humans spread, mammoths, giant ground sloths, and saber-toothed cats declined. The causes remain debated. Was it climate change at the end of the Ice Age, human hunting pressure, or both? Archaeological evidence shows people hunting large animals, but the scale of impact is uncertain. What is clear is that as these giants disappeared, humans increasingly relied on smaller animals, plants, and fish, shifting economies to match ecological change. Burials provide intimate glimpses of these expanding communities. Graves from early sites often include tools, ornaments, and ochre. These practices show that migration was not only about survival, but also about maintaining traditions of respect and remembrance. Even as groups dispersed thousands of kilometers apart, the act of honoring the dead remained constant. Cultural continuity carried forward alongside adaptation. Daily tasks reflected ingenuity. Stones became spear points, scrapers, and knives. Bones served as needles and awls. Fire provided warmth, cooking, and light in every camp. Hides stretched into shelters or draped across frames to make clothing. The essentials of human life, shelter, food, warmth, were pursued with materials at hand, reshaped again and again to fit new lands. Though the settings changed, the rhythm of camp life endured. On a planetary level, The peopling of the Americas marked the completion of human expansion across all major continents. Africa, Eurasia, and Australia had long been settled. With the Americas filled, only Antarctica remained untouched. For the first time, humanity was truly global, present in nearly every habitable environment on Earth. The journey that began in Africa more than 70,000 years earlier had now reached the farthest southern shores. What makes this expansion remarkable is not only its speed, but its continuity. Step by step, families carried fire, tools, and memory into new landscapes. They left hearths on tundra, plains, mountains, and forests. They adapted to scarcity and abundance, to cold winds and humid jungles. Within a few millennia, the Americas were alive with human presence. The story is written in stone points, footprints, and traces of fire, evidence of a continent swiftly transformed by adaptability and resilience. For much of the last century, the story of the first Americans was told as if it were simple. Archaeologists pointed to the widespread Clovis culture, with its finely made fluted spear points, as the earliest evidence of humans on the continent. These tools dated to around 13,000 years ago. The narrative seemed complete. Groups had crossed the land bridge of Beringia, waited until an ice-free corridor opened between the Laurentide and Cordilleran glaciers, and then spread swiftly south. The clarity of the tools and their wide distribution offered a tidy explanation. Yet as decades passed, evidence began to challenge that clarity. Sites such as Monteverde in southern Chile revealed wooden structures, hearths, and chewed seaweed dating to more than 14,500 years ago. Such dates stretched the timeline earlier and much farther south than the Clovis first model allowed. If people were living in Chile by that time, they must have entered the Americas much earlier to allow for the long migration south. The picture of a single migration replaced by a layered, uncertain narrative. Another discovery that added complexity came from Meadowcroft Rock Shelter in Pennsylvania. There, stone tools and hearths have been dated to possibly 16,000 years ago, though the results remain debated. In Idaho, the Cooper's Ferry site also shows evidence of human activity older than 15,000 years. Each new layer of evidence points to an earlier entry, suggesting that the Americas were occupied long before Clovis points appeared across the plains. One lesser-known site lies far north in the Yukon, Bluefish Caves. Animal bones from those caves display marks interpreted by some researchers as signs of butchery. The dates, possibly older than 20,000 years, would make them the earliest signs of humans on the continent. Yet interpretation is contested. Some argue the marks could have been caused by natural processes such as carnivore gnawing or cracking under freeze and thaw. The debate reflects how fragile evidence can shape or undo entire timelines. Genetics offers another perspective. Studies of ancient DNA suggest that the ancestors of Native Americans were isolated in Beringia during the last glacial maximum, roughly 20,000 years ago. This Beringian standstill hypothesis proposes that small populations survived in a cold but resource-rich refugium, sustained by steppe plants, caribou, and fish. When glaciers retreated, they dispersed south. This genetic signal helps explain the unity of most Native American lineages, but it does not answer exactly when the first steps were taken across the new lands. The coastal migration hypothesis has grown stronger with time. Instead of waiting for an interior corridor, people may have moved along the Pacific shore, following kelp forests and abundant marine life. Even simple watercraft could have enabled steady travel. Archaeological sites on the Channel Islands of California, with early shell middens and fishing tools, support this idea. Yet much of the Ice Age shoreline now lies beneath the ocean, more than 100 meters below present sea level. The richest evidence of those early journeys may be lost underwater, hidden from excavation. At a planetary scale, these questions reflect the constant shifts of climate and sea. During the last glacial maximum, vast sheets of ice locked away so much water that coastlines stretched far out from today's boundaries. Rivers cut new paths, plains spread wide, and refugees appeared in unexpected places. As the world warmed, ice retreated and seas rose, drowning ancient campsites, villages, and routes. Human traces are preserved only where chance allowed. The Earth itself both reveals and conceals history. Among the most striking finds of recent years are the fossilized footprints at White Sands, New Mexico. Preserved in gypsum sediments, they show children and adults walking across soft ground near a lake. Radiocarbon dating of seeds in the layers suggests ages as old as 23,000 years. If confirmed, these prints are the oldest direct evidence of humans in the Americas. Some researchers caution that dating lake deposits is difficult, but the images of the footprints are undeniable. They are the steps of real people pressed into the earth during the Ice Age. Another subtle line of evidence comes from languages. Across the America, there are over 100 distinct language families, many with no close relatives. Linguists argue that such diversity requires long spans of time to develop. While language cannot be dated with the precision of radiocarbon, it hints that the peopling of the Americas may have begun well before 13,000 years ago. A scientific mystery still surrounds the possibility of multiple migrations. Genetic studies show that most indigenous Americans descend from a single founding population. Yet some groups in South America carry traces of ancestry distantly related to populations of Australasia. This population Y signal suggests a more complicated history than a single wave. Whether these traces represent an early, now vanished migration or ancient population structure within Asia remains unsolved. The extinction of megafauna adds another unresolved layer. As humans spread, mammoths, mastodons, giant sloths, and saber-toothed cats vanished. The causes remain debated. Was it overhunting, climate shifts, or a combination? Archaeological sites show humans hunting or processing large animals, yet climate change altered habitats at the same time. The disappearance of these giants reshaped ecosystems and forced humans to rely more on plants, fish, and smaller animals. Burials help reveal the human side of these migrations. Graves older than Clovis contain bodies dusted with red ochre, adorned with ornaments, and placed carefully. These practices show continuity with rituals seen elsewhere in the world, connecting people in the Americas with broader traditions of respect for the dead. Even as they entered entirely new continents, they carried their beliefs with them. On a global scale, the settlement of the Americas marked the final step of human expansion. By the end of the Ice Age, people lived in Africa, Europe, Asia, Australia, and now both North and South America. Only Antarctica remained untouched. Humanity had become a truly global species, present in nearly every climate zone, from Arctic tundra to tropical forest, from coastal islands to high mountains. The unresolved timing of this migration is not a weakness, but a reminder of how knowledge grows. A footprint here, a cut-marked bone there, a layer of charcoal beneath ash, all are fragments of a greater puzzle. Each discovery stretches the timeline further back, showing that the story is more complex, more layered, and more resilient than once believed. The precise year of arrival may never be known. What matters is that by at least 14,500 years ago, and perhaps as early as 23,000, humans were living across the Americas, adapting to their environments with the same ingenuity that carried them out of Africa so many millennia before. By the end of the Ice Age, the human presence in the Americas was unmistakable. Communities stretched from the northern tundra to the southernmost tip of South America. This expansion had taken place in only a few thousand years, a brief moment when set against the long span of human prehistory. The continents offered every imaginable landscape: frozen plains, vast rivers, dense forests, open savannas, high plateaus, and coastal estuaries. In each of these environments, people left their traces in tools, hearths, footprints, and bones. Archaeologists working across North and South America have recovered stone points, blades, scrapers, and grinding stones. These tools show remarkable variety, adapted to different environments and prey. In the grasslands of North America, hunters fashioned large fluted points to bring down mammoths and bison. In tropical forests, people relied more on smaller blades and plant processing tools. In coastal regions, shell middens testify to the importance of fishing and gathering. Each toolkit reveals how the knowledge was carried and reshaped as groups adapted to local resources. One lesser-known detail comes from the site of Page Ladson in Florida. Deep within a sinkhole, divers discovered butchered mastodon bones and stone tools dating to more than 14,500 years ago. The site shows that humans were present in the southeast long before the Clovis horizon. The preservation of dung, pollen, and plant remains in the sediments provides a rare glimpse into the Ice Age environment: cypress swamps, water lilies, and grazing megafauna. These details help reconstruct not only the presence of humans, but the world they inhabited. The great mystery that persists is how quickly people spread across such vast distances. From Beringia to Tierra del Fuego measures more than 13,000 kilometers, longer than the journey from Paris to Seoul and back again. Yet archaeological evidence suggests that humans reached the southern tip of South America by at least 14,500 years ago. That means the migration, whether coastal or inland, must have been astonishingly rapid, spanning entire continents in perhaps only a millennium or two. How families organized, how they navigated unknown terrain, and how they coordinated movement are questions that remain unanswered. The planetary scale of change at this time cannot be overstated. As glaciers melted, rivers swelled, lakes expanded, and coastlines shifted, meltwater pulses sent torrents into the oceans, raising sea levels by tens of meters. Habitats changed within lifetimes. Where Mammoth Steppe once stretched, forests advanced. Where shorelines once provided rich marine harvests, rising seas drowned villages and campsites. Humans were forced into continual adaptation, moving with the water, the forests, and the herds. Genetic evidence now shows that the founding population of the Americas was relatively small. Yet in a few thousand years, these groups diversified into countless nations, each with its own languages, customs, and landscapes. The foundations of later indigenous cultures were laid in this deep past. From the Andes to the Great Plains, from the Amazon to the Arctic, each region nurtured distinctive traditions. Archaeology hints at the early beginnings of this diversity, variations in tool style, settlement pattern, and symbolic expression. Another unresolved scientific question concerns the role of fire. Charcoal layers in ancient sediments show that humans burned landscapes to encourage new plant growth or to drive animals. Was this practice widespread in the early millennia of settlement, or did it emerge later? The timing matters because it reveals how quickly humans reshaped ecosystems. Some researchers suggest that fire use, combined with climate warming, accelerated the extinction of megafauna. Others argue that natural climate shifts alone explain the changes. The answer remains elusive. In South America, evidence from the high Andes demonstrates early adaptation to altitude. Sites above 3,000 meters contain hearths and tools dating back more than 12,000 years. The thin air and cold climate would have been a challenge, yet people established footholds there almost immediately. Genetic studies suggest that Andean populations later developed adaptations to hypoxia, changes rooted in these early settlements. This rapid move into extreme environments illustrates the versatility that characterized human expansion. Another lesser-known finding comes from caves in Brazil. Rock shelters at Pedra Furada contain hearths and stone flakes that some archaeologists date to as early as 30,000 years ago. The evidence is controversial, with critics arguing that natural processes created the flakes. But if confirmed, it would push the entry of humans into South America far earlier than most models allow. Such debates reflect the precarious nature of archaeological interpretation, where entire narratives hinge on the shape of a stone or the layering of ash. On a planetary level, the settlement of the Americas completed humanity's global journey, from Africa, across Asia, into Australia, through Europe, and now across the last great land masses of the Western Hemisphere. Humans had reached nearly every habitable corner of the Earth. The only continent left untouched was Antarctica. In less than 100,000 years, our species had circled the globe, adapting to tundra, deserts, mountains, and jungles. The expansion into the Americas was the closing act of that immense migration. Burials remind us of the human dimension of this achievement. At sites like Anzick in Montana, the body of a child was interred with red ochre and finely made tools, dated to around 12,600 years ago. This burial is one of the earliest known in North America and provides both genetic and cultural insights. The care with which the child was laid to rest shows continuity with traditions across the world, where the dead were honored even amid hardship. Such moments connect the archaeological record to the lives and emotions of the people themselves. The extinction of megafauna looms as a final unresolved question. Within a few thousand years of widespread human presence, mammoths, mastodons, giant sloths, and other great beasts vanished. Their disappearance transformed ecosystems, removing keystone species and altering plant communities. Whether humans caused these extinctions through hunting and fire, or whether climate alone sealed their fate, is still debated. What is certain is that the arrival of people coincided with profound ecological change, a pattern seen repeatedly across the globe. Step by step, the Americas filled with human life. Camps appeared along rivers, villages formed near coasts, and trade networks began to link distant groups. Tools, ideas, and genes moved across the continents. By 10,000 years ago, humans had settled nearly everywhere. The groundwork was laid for the rise of farming, cities, and civilizations in later millennia. The first great chapter of the Americas, the story of arrival, exploration, and adaptation, was complete. In the quiet record of stone, bone, and soil, we glimpse both certainty and mystery. Certainty that humans came, thrived, and spread. Mystery in the details of how, when, and by what routes. The story remains unfinished, written partly in evidence and partly in questions. What endures is the image of small bands of people, stepping into new worlds, guided by the rhythms of ice and sea, leaving behind the faint but lasting marks of their presence. The first footsteps in the Americas are pressed deep into silence, a footprint in wet gypsum, a hearth beneath ancient ash, a flake of stone shaped by practiced hands. Each is a whisper of presence, carried across thousands of years. They tell us that people moved steadily, patiently, through ice, forest, and coast. They carried memory, tools, and language, and in time they filled 2 continents with life. Yet, so much is missing. Coastlines that once held early camps now lie beneath the sea. Glacial floods erased whole landscapes. Fires and storms consumed wood and fiber. What survives are fragments, enough to suggest beginnings, never enough to resolve every path. The mystery itself becomes part of the record, reminding us of the scale of time. Across the world, climate continues to rise and fall. Ice advances and retreats. Against such planetary rhythms, human presence seems fragile. Yet it endures. From Africa to the Americas, the pattern is clear: adaptation, resilience, and movement. Each migration adds to the shared story of survival. The first Americans entered a land vast and unfamiliar. They walked beside mammoths, watched glaciers melt, and learned to live in forests and deserts. Their descendants remain, carrying languages, traditions, and memories that link the deep past to the present. Archaeology traces their beginnings. Culture preserves their continuities. Tonight, as the record rests in earth and stone, the story ends in stillness. The footsteps remain where they were pressed, long ago, holding the weight of lives that carried humanity to the last great continents. What endures is the quiet certainty that the journey never truly ended.